Hello viewers, this is Nimra TV and you're watching Perspectives with me, MARYAM Olubode. Political test. The governor has been suspended, the legislature dissolved, and the military is in control. What exactly is happening in Rivers State? A political storm is sweeping through Nigeria's oil-rich Rivers State. In a dramatic turn of events, President Bola Tinubu has declared a state of emergency, effectively removing Governor Siminalayi Fubara from office and handing control to the military. It didn't stop there. The State House of Assembly was also suspended, leaving Rivers with no elected leadership. Instead, Tinubu has appointed retired Vice Admiral Ibokete Ibas as the military administrator. Soldiers have now taken control of the government house in Port Harcourt. This raises some serious questions. Is this a military coup in disguise? What does this mean for Nigeria's democracy, and why is Rivers State at the center of this political crisis? A supposed ceasefire, a high-stakes phone call, and yet drones, missiles, and explosions. What went wrong? Within hours of what was supposed to be a diplomatic breakthrough, Russia and Ukraine were back at it, launching deadly drone attacks against each other. The Trump-Putin call was meant to offer a glimmer of peace. Instead, the war just escalated. So what happened? Was the ceasefire a bluff? Was the deal doomed from the start? And most importantly, is this war now unstoppable? Airstrikes, tank incursions, and a humanitarian catastrophe. Israel launches a major ground assault in Gaza, and the ceasefire is officially over. The truce was fragile. The ceasefire was on life support, and now it's dead. And the major military escalation. Israeli forces have launched the first full-scale ground offensive in Gaza since the collapse of the ceasefire. The target, a key corridor in central Gaza, cutting off a mass supply route and consolidating Israeli control. And as the war machine rolls forward, the humanitarian crisis spirals out of control. So what happened? Why did the ceasefire fail? What is Israel's next move? And is there any hope for peace? All of this and more coming, but first the news headlines. Military storms Rivers State government house as Tinubu declares emergency rule. And men abduct dozens from a bus in Ethiopia. Ukraine-Russia war it up hours after Trump-Putin call. Israel's ground offensive in Gaza. Deportation of Venezuelans. Kidnapping or national security. The chilling crimes of Nicholas Prosper. Now to the news and details. Military storms Rivers State government house as Tinubu declares emergency rule.
In these circumstances, having soberly reflected on and evaluated the political situation in Rivers State, and the governor and deputy governor of Rivers State, having failed to make a request to me as president to issue this proclamation as required by Section 305, Paragraph 5 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, it has become inevitably compelling for me to invoke the provision of the Section 305 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, to declare a state of emergency in Rivers State with effect from today, 18th March, year 2025, and I so do.
To understand how Rivers State got here, we need to go back. The crisis has been brewing for months, fueled by a bitter political rivalry between Governor Fubara and his predecessor, Nyesom Wike, who now serves as the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, FCT. Initially, it looked like a typical godfather-godson fallout, something Nigerians are used to seeing in politics, but things quickly escalated. State lawmakers many of whom were loyal to Wike, moved to impeach Fubara, accusing him of bypassing the legislature in budget approvals and making unconstitutional appointments. Fubara pushed back, dismissing lawmakers and insisting that he was still in charge. What followed was political chaos. Security operatives stormed the assembly complex. Lawmakers were divided and protests rocked Port Harcourt. The power struggle crippled governance in the state, and Rivers was on the brink of anarchy. Then came the final blow. President Tinubu stepped in. In his nationwide broadcast on March 18, 2025, Tinubu announced the emergency rule, claiming that the decision was necessary to restore order. He cited two major concerns. First, political instability. The leadership crisis in Rivers, he said, had paralyzed governance and threatened national security. Second, security threats. Tinubu pointed to recent attacks on oil pipelines, including the fire on the Trans-Niger pipeline, which he blamed on a breakdown in security under Fubara. But let's be clear, there's a pattern to how Nigeria's federal government handles political crisis in opposition-led states. In 2006, President Olusegun Obasanjo declared emergency rule in Ekiti State, removing Governor Ayofayose. In 2014, President Goodluck Jonathan imposed emergency rule in 3 northern states to combat Boko Haram insurgency. But this time, there is no insurgency in Rivers State, just political infighting. So, is this really about security, or is it an excuse to neutralize opposition? Hours after the emergency rule was declared, military personnel took over the government house in Port Harcourt. Witnesses described how heavily armed soldiers arrived in armored personnel carriers, blocking access to the building. At 9 p.m., residents near the government house reported seeing a military convoy roll in. Governor Fubara's whereabouts remained unclear, and it's unknown whether he was inside when the military took over. This move has sent shockwaves across Nigeria. Rivers State, known for its economic importance, is now under military control for the first time since the end of military rule. The suspension of an elected governor and legislature has sparked national outrage. Civil society groups, legal experts, and opposition leaders are calling it unconstitutional. The Nigerian Bar Association (NBA) has condemned the move, saying a state of emergency does not mean the suspension of democratic institutions. This is illegal. The Human Rights Writers Association of Nigeria (HURIWA) went even further, warning that this is a coup against the people of Rivers State. Nigeria is sliding into dictatorship. Supporters of Governor Fubara vowed to resist, calling for mass protests against what they describe as an illegal takeover of the state. So what happens next? With military rule now in effect, the big question is, how long will this last? Tinubu's emergency order suspends governors for 6 months, but history suggests that emergency rules often last longer than promised. The military administrator, Vice Admiral Abbas, is now in full control of Rivers State, with sweeping powers to run the government without elections or legislative oversight. But resistance is building. Protests expected, legal battles are looming. And Rivers State is set to become the battleground for the future of Nigerian democracy. Is this the beginning of a dangerous trend of executive overreach? Will other states face similar takeovers? Or will this backfire on Tinubu's government? The world is watching, and so is Nigeria. Moving on, terror on the highway, harm may abduct dozens from a bus in Ethiopia. Another day, another tragedy in Ethiopia. This time, it's a mass abduction. A bus traveling from Addis Ababa to Derby Marcos was intercepted by armed militants in the Oromia region. Over 56 passengers were dragged out, beaten, and forcefully taken away. Their destination unknown, their fate uncertain. The incident happened on March 17, 2025 near Halidoro town in the Dugam district of North Shewa Zone, Oromia. According to eyewitnesses, the attack was swift and brutal. One survivor described the horror. They stopped the bus, ordered everyone out, and started beating people. Then, they forced them into the forest. Downhill, we don't know where they took them. Who were those gunmen? Suspicion falls on the Oromo Liberation Army, or LA, an insurgent group responsible for numerous kidnappings and attacks in Ethiopia. The real question is, how do these militants keep getting away with it? This is not an isolated incident. It is part of a terrifying trend. Let's run a few months. In July 2024, over 100 university students were abducted in the same region. Their buses were stopped. They were taken into the forest. To this day, their whereabouts remain unknown. In January 2024, in another attack, more than 30 travelers were kidnapped in Oromia under similar circumstances. Again, no trace of them. This is not just lawlessness. This is a systemic failure. Ethiopia's highways have become hunting grounds. Anyone boarding a bus is at risk of being snatched away, never to be seen again. The Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, is an armed group that splintered from the Oromo Liberation Front. They claim to fight for several, but their methods include kidnapping civilians, demanding ransoms, and unleashing terror. Ethiopia's government has designated them a terrorist organization, but despite this label, they operate freely, hijacking buses and abducting citizens in broad daylight. How? Where's the security apparatus? Where is the law enforcement? A national crisis is unfolding. Ethiopian citizens are being abducted in groups. This should trigger immediate government action. Instead, there is silence. No statement, no condemnations, no military response. Just another news cycle that will fade away into the next kidnapping. Families of the victims are left waiting. Will there be ransom demands? Will they ever see their loved ones again? This is a question that should never have to be asked, but in Ethiopia today, this is the reality. Ethiopia was once seen as East Africa's rising power. Today, it is a nation where stepping onto a bus can mean disappearing forever. This is no longer about a single kidnapping. It is about a country losing control, an insurgency growing bolder, and a government that refuses to act. And until something changes, the abductions will continue. Moving on, Ukraine-Russia war heats up hours after Trump-Putin call. On March 18, 2025, US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin had a long-awaited phone call. The agenda negotiating a ceasefire. Trump had promised a 30-day halt to hostilities, a pause that Ukraine supported, but Russia, not so much. Putin wasn't willing to stop unless his conditions were met. Ukraine must stop its military mobilization. Western countries must stop sending weapons to Kyiv. Ukraine and its allies weren't having any of it, and so, instead of a full ceasefire, what the world got was a limited agreement, what Putin barely committed to. Fast forward a few hours, and any illusion of peace was shattered by missiles and exploding drones. The result happened just hours after the so-called ceasefire. Russia launched 145 drones into Ukraine. Yes, 145. The targets energy infrastructure, railways, and even hospitals. Ukraine's Air Force shot down 72 of those drones, but some made it through. The hospital in Sumy was hit, civilians were injured, and the power grid took a major hit. Meanwhile, Ukraine struck back. Drones sprayed down Russian territory. Russia claims it intercepted 57 Ukrainian drones, but one made it to an oil depot in Krasnodar, causing a massive fire. Does that sound like a ceasefire? Not even close. Let's call it what it is. This was never a real ceasefire. It was a fragile, half-baked deal that neither side trusted. Putin knew this. Zelensky knew this, and deep down, Trump probably knew it too. Western allies saw through it immediately. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius called it a weak compromise that benefits only Russia. French President Emmanuel Macron said it outright. Ukraine will keep getting weapons, no matter what Putin demands. So why the phone call? Why pretend peace was even possible? Because optics matter to Trump, to Putin, to everyone involved. A call like this makes leaders look like peacemakers, even when they know nothing will change. If this is what happens during a so-called ceasefire, imagine what happens when there is no diplomatic cover left. Russia will keep eating Ukraine's energy grid, trying to freeze Ukraine into surrender. Ukraine will keep striking back, targeting oil depots, military bases, and strategic infrastructure inside Russia. The West will keep supplying weapons, despite Russia's threats. And Trump, he might try again. Another phone call, another negotiation, but unless Putin truly backs down, this war is far from over. For now, diplomacy has failed, and the war is only getting worse. Moving on. Israel's ground offensive in Gaza. The ceasefire was signed under pressure. A Friday truce negotiated by Qatar, Egypt, and the US, but it was never built to last. Here is why. First, hostages versus prisoners. Israel wanted all hostages back. Hamas wanted Palestinian prisoners released. Neither side was willing to budge. Second, expanding war front. Israel was still fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon while Hamas continued to rebuild in Gaza. Third is Western pressure versus domestic politics. The US and allies pushed for a ceasefire, but Netanyahu faced pressure from his right-wing coalition to keep going. And then the inevitable happened. Violence resumed.
Just 2 months old, baby Adnan has known nothing but war. His parents haven't even had time to register his birth. Now he's in hospital, injured by an Israeli strike. He was born the day after the war began, his father says. I wish he could have seen a life other than this one. They told us to flee the north, but this is what we found. Israel's focus is now on the south of Gaza. Ground troops are closing in on the city of Khan Yunis as it's pummeled by airstrikes. Israel says Hamas's leadership is here, but so too are hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who've already been forced to leave their homes.
Within days, the ceasefire was gone, and Gaza was under siege once again. Israel wasted no time. Within hours of the truce collapsing, the military launched a full-scale ground assault. This is no ordinary attack. The Israeli army has moved into the Netzarman corridor, a critical stretch of land that effectively splits Gaza into two. Why does this matter? Because controlling this corridor means cutting Hamas off from the north and south, isolating its fighters and disrupting its supply lines. Why now? Because Israel is preparing for phase 2, a deeper invasion into southern Gaza, where Hamas leaders are believed to be hiding. Heavy clashes reported. Israeli tanks and armored units rode into central Gaza while Hamas fighters engaged in guerrilla warfare, using tunnels, sleepers, and rocket-propelled grenades. Airstrike continued. Israeli jets bombed suspected Hamas hideouts in Rafah, Khan Yunis, and Jabalia. Over 400 Palestinians killed. The Gaza Health Ministry report that entire families have been wiped out. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and bodies are being pulled from the rubble. This is the bloodiest chapter in the war so far. This is not just another battle. This is part of a bigger strategy, one that could reshape the war entirely. Israel's next move could be a deeper invasion into Rafah. Netanyahu has repeatedly hinted that Rafah, the last Hamas stronghold, will be next. Also, a total military occupation of Gaza. If Hamas refuses to surrender, Israel may commit to a long-term presence inside Gaza. Also, more pressure on Hamas to negotiate. If the fighting gets worse, international pressure could force both sides back to the table. But for now, diplomacy is dead, and the war is raging on. The world is watching, and the reaction has divided as ever. For Western allies, Israel has the right to defend itself. The US stands with Israel. The UK and Germany support Israel's actions. Both countries say Hamas must be dismantled. For Arab nations, this is a war crime. Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey condemn Israel's actions, calling them a massacre against civilians. Qatar threatens to suspend its role as the mediator. Without Qatar, future ceasefire talks will collapse completely. UN officials are warning of a disaster. Over 1.5 million people have been displaced. Food, water, and medical supplies are running out. Gaza's last functioning hospitals are overflowing. A UN staffer was killed in an Israeli strike. The first confirmed US casualty in this new wave of violence. This isn't just a war anymore. This is a humanitarian catastrophe. Israel's ground offensive marks a turning point in the Gaza war. The ceasefire is gone. The fighting is escalating. And both sides are digging in for the long haul. So what happens next? Will Israel launch a full invasion of Rafah? Will Hamas retaliate with another wave of rocket attacks? Will international pressure force another ceasefire? Right now, the answers are unclear. What is clear is this: the war is far from over, and Gaza is bleeding once again. Moving on. Venezuelans' deportation, kidnapping, or national security. A diplomatic standoff, a century-old law, and hundreds of Venezuelan migrants trapped in an El Salvadoran prison. Washington calls it security enforcement. Caracas calls it a state-sponsored crime. What really happened? The world woke up to an explosive diplomatic clash this week after the United States deported 238 Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador under an obscure war-era law from 1798. The US says these migrants had criminal ties to the notorious Tren de Aragua gang and had to act fast. Venezuela, on the other hand, calls this a gross human rights violation, an international abduction operation orchestrated under a dubious legal pretext. And now, President Nicolas Maduro is waging an all-out diplomatic and legal battle to bring them back. But how did we get here? And more importantly, what are the consequences of Washington's boldest immigration crackdown yet? To understand the outrage, we need to talk about the Alien Enemies Act, a law written when John Adams was president. It allows the US government to deport or detain foreign nationals from enemy nations during wartime. The problem? The US is not at war with Venezuela. So, how did Trump justify using this against Venezuelan migrants? The administration classified the deportees as a national security threat linked to gang violence. It circumvented normal legal processes, arguing that because they were enemy nationals under this law, they didn't need a trial before deportation. It struck a secret deal with El Salvador's president Nayib Bukele, ensuring the deportees ended up in Central America instead of Venezuela. And then came the backlash.
I can tell you this, these were bad people. That was a bad group of, as I say, hombres. That was a bad group. When you look at them and you look at the crimes that they've committed, you take a look. You don't get any tougher, you don't get worse than that. Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals.
Maduro went on the offensive within hours, calling the move a modern-day act of piracy. These men and women were ripped from their homes without trial, without evidence, and without Venezuelans' consent. This is not deportation. This is kidnapping. Here is what Venezuela is demanding. First, immediate repatriation of the deported Venezuelans. An official explanation from Washington on the legal basis for the move. Sanction on El Salvador for collaborating with what Caracas called a raw U.S. oppression. And not just rhetoric. Venezuela has formally petitioned the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, arguing that this sets a dangerous precedent for international law. But here is the bigger issue. Why is El Salvador involved at all? On paper, this makes no sense. Why would Washington send Venezuelan deportees to El Salvador, a country with no direct connection to them? The answer, a deal behind closed doors. El Salvador received something in exchange for accepting deportees. Because administration, under fire for mass incarceration, saw this as an opportunity to strengthen U.S. ties. The deportees are now trapped in El Salvador's mega prison, a facility infamous for its brutal conditions, mass detentions, and limited legal oversight, and now the world is watching. The case has ignited a firestorm of criticism from human rights organizations. The UN Human Rights Office called the deportation a violation of due process and human dignity. Amnesty International condemned the mass deportation without trial. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights warned that this could set a precedent for mass deportations under vague security claims. The legal community is also deeply divided. Some say using a wartime law from 1798 in 2025 is absurd and legally questionable. Others want that if Washington can do this to Venezuelans today, who is next? And the backlash isn't just diplomatic. The streets of Caracas are boiling with thousands demanding the return of their deported relatives. Families claim that their loved ones had no criminal records. They were denied legal representation. They were taken from their homes overnight in what they call a military-style roundup. And the protests are not just in Venezuela. Latino communities in the US are mobilizing, seeing this as a warning shot for mass deportations under Trump. Legal challenges are already mounting against the US government. The Trump administration is under fire. Meanwhile, Maduro is weaponizing the outrage, calling this a full-scale war against Venezuelans living abroad. So far, the US is doubling down. The White House insists the deportees were linked to criminal organizations. They argue that public safety comes before diplomatic niceties. They claim that El Salvador was the best option because Venezuela refused to take them back. But the cracks are already showing. A federal judge questioned the legality of the deportations, and lawsuits are now piling up. But partisan lawmakers are divided. Some Republicans support the move, while Democrats warn of human rights violations. Other Latin American nations are uneasy, fearing that their migrants could be next in line. This case is far from over. The next few weeks decide whether this turns into a full-blown international crisis. Three key questions remain. Will Venezuela retaliate diplomatically or economically? Maduro has hinted at countermeasures, including cutting oil export to US allies. Second, will the legal challenges block future deportations? If a court rules against the US government, this could halt similar deportations indefinitely. Will El Salvador cave under pressure? With rising criticism, UK might reconsider holding Venezuelan deportees in its already overcrowded prison. This deportation isn't just about 238 Venezuelans. It's about setting a precedent. If the US can use a 226-year-old wartime law to deport people without trial, who is next? If Washington can send migrants to third countries under secret deals, how will this impact global migration policies? And if Venezuela successfully challenges this, will this reshape US deportation policies entirely? One thing is clear, this is just the beginning. And as tensions rise, the world is watching. Moving on. chilling crimes of Nicholas Prosper. What happens when a young man meticulously plans a massacre, kills his own family, and prepares to gun down children in a school? You get one of the most horrifying crimes the UK has seen in recent history. Nicholas Prosper, a name that will forever be linked with unimaginable horror, has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 49 years from a crime so twisted. It reads like a net marriage script. This is a case of a calculated killer, a failed system, and a crime that could have been much worse.
Nicholas Prosper wanted to be the most notorious school shooter in the UK. But this is the moment that plan is disrupted.
Birmingham Road, I think we've got the offender.
At this point, he's already murdered his family, and these officers at the end of a night shift happen to see him on the street. Their instinct tells them something's not right. They see blood on his face, and a shotgun and cartridges are found nearby.
Sorry, I'm a bit riled. Upstairs, just gone up to knock on the door, sorry. I had a massive bang, sounded like a gunshot.
Prosper, seen here leaving the flats where he lives, has just used that shotgun to shoot his mother Juliana Falcon, his 13-year-old sister Giselle, and his 16-year-old brother Kyle.
It all started in the quiet end of Luton. On a September morning in 2024, Prosper, just 19 years old, walked into his home carrying a shotgun and a plan. He shot and killed his 48-year-old mother, Juliana Falcon, before turning his gun on his 16-year-old brother, Kyle, and his 13-year-old sister, Giselle. The details are gruesome. Kyle wasn't just shot, he was stabbed over 100 times. Giselle, who should have been worrying about school exams, never stood a chance. Prosper didn't stop there. After slaughtering his family, he wrote a deranged manifesto where he detailed his next target: St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School, his former school. His plan? To walk into a classroom full of 4-year-olds and kill as many as possible. He was obsessed with the Sandy Hook school shooting in the United States and wanted to go down in history with an even bigger body count. But something went wrong. Neighbors heard the commotion. They heard his screams. They called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived, stopping Prosper before he could reach the school. What if they hadn't? What if he had made it to that classroom? What if the UK had witnessed a mass school shooting, something almost unheard of in modern British history? This is the reality. A crime that should have never happened. A tragedy that was partially prevented, but only just. Who does something like this, who plots a school shooting, kills their whole family, and tries to outdo some of history's most notorious killers? Prosper wasn't an outcast. He wasn't suffering from untreated mental illness, nor was he a victim of abuse. He was intelligent, methodical, and calculated. He forged a firearms license, obtaining a shotgun, and mapped out every detail of his crimes. Judge Justice Chimagrup, who sentenced him, didn't hold back. You are an intelligent, calculating, and selfish young man. You have no remorse. You knew exactly what you were doing. Prosper didn't snap. He wasn't acting out of rage. This was planned. This was deliberate. This was cold-blooded murder. And here is the big question. How did he get a gun? Britain has some of the toughest gun laws in the world. You can't just walk into a store and buy a shotgun. Yet somehow, a 19-year-old forged a firearms license, ordered a weapon, and had it delivered to his home. How? Why weren't there background checks? Why weren't there security measures? Home Secretary Beth Cooper has now promised a full review of the system, but here is the truth. This review should have happened before 3 innocent people were murdered. There is another part of this story that should terrify us all: the internet. Prosper wasn't just inspired by Sandy Hook. He was part of a disturbing online world. A dark web of mass shooter forums, hate-filled manifestos, and communities that glorify violence. The investigation found that he had been active in online extremist spaces that encourage young men to commit mass shootings. He was studying previous attacks, learning from other killers, and preparing his own moment of infamy. And this is not an isolated case. How many young men are sitting behind their screens right now, reading about mass shootings, getting radicalized, and planning their own horrors? How many Nicholas Prospers are out there? Prosper will spend the rest of his life behind bars, or at least 49 years before he's even considered for parole, but then he'll be nearly 70 years old. But that's little comfort for the families mourning Juliana, Keel, and Giselle. Little comfort for the people of Lytton, who now know how close they came to a national tragedy. And little comfort for a world that is slowly realizing a horrifying truth. The internet is breeding killers. Gun laws are failing. And we are one step away from the next Nicholas Prosper. The question is, will we stop it in time? Before I go, once again the news headlines. Military storms Rivers State Government House as Tinubu declares emergency rule. Armed men abduct dozens from a bus in Ethiopia. Ukraine-Russia war heat up as after Trump retained call. Israel's ground offensive in Gaza. Deportation of Venezuelans, kidnapping or national security. The thrilling crimes of Nicholas Prosper. Thanks for staying tuned once again. I'm MARYAM OLUGBODE.